people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. Preliminary reports indicate that Katie Taylor's big send-off at Croke Park is all but a done deal, set to go down September 5th. Katie Taylor will receive her dream farewell in Ireland at Croke Park on September 5th, as a deal is now done. An opponent for the event is still soon to be decided, with an announcement soon. So there seems to have been more emphasis on the location of the match than the opponent itself, because the occasion really is it being Katie's send-off. It's not about a big name, a big fight, so much as it being Katie's farewell fight.
It's not about a belt, there's some belts.
Now that Alicia Baumgartner has already spent a good amount of time advocating for a Katie Taylor fight to be her next opponent, but I just don't know how realistic that is. I think Katie Taylor is past the point of having to prove one.
Prove a point.
Prove anything to anyone. Her resume as it stands speaks for itself. She's been in there with practically anybody and everybody at or around the lightweight division. Shattering glass ceilings and kicking down doors for women's boxing from the amateurs into the pros.
I would say that she is directly responsible for me covering the women and watching their fights here on the channel. It really did all start with Katie, and the curiosity that here you have this really great fighter that's coming into the paid ranks. I wonder if there are other fighters just like her, and then I found out.
There are many other great women fighters out there, but of course, there is only one, Katie Taylor, who in retiring will be leaving behind big shoes to fill, and I've yet to see a worthy successor.
Caroline Dubois fancies herself the next face of women's boxing, as does Alicia Baumgartner, but the metrics for their fights don't tell that story. Maybe it'll pick up after Katie's gone.
I would have given that designation to Amanda Serrano, except that Amanda Serrano, who's a big draw unto herself and makes a lot of money per fight, she's very close to retiring too, so she can't be Katie's successor. And what about Clarissa Shields?
Too annoying, too polarizing, and she doesn't have the abundance of opponent options to carry the sport on her back with her fights, even if she's very skilled, and even if in the absence of Katie Taylor, she is pound for pound number one.
Without an abundance of opponent options to make for high-profile fights to capture the audience's attention, it's hard to say that she's the face in the absence of Katie.
Who do you think she's gonna fight?
I would comb through the alphabet's ranked standings for anybody in position to challenge her as a mandatory, but this being her final fight, you don't get the impression that she's all that concerned with hanging on to those alphabet titles. Perhaps it could be Natasha Jonas, the quasi-retired fighter, last in action over a year ago, losing a decision to Lauren Price.
She ain't fought since then, but she has stated she's open to boxing Katie again in what would be a rematch of their initial meeting.
Maybe it'll be Natasha. She's not otherwise preoccupied. Maybe it'll be somebody else who I don't think it's going to be, is Alicia Baumgartner. She's been vocal,
adamant that she wants to box Katie Taylor, but a lot of people are interpreting that as a deflection, that you're focusing on a fight you're not likely to get, so you can get out of a fight that's right there for you.
And on your side of the street, because both Alicia and Caroline are promoted by MVP.
That's the fight people want her to have, more than a Katie Taylor fight set to go down towards the end of the year, all the way out there in September, which would give them plenty of time to select an opponent, because they haven't yet.
Bittersweet to see her go, but nobody's earned it more than Katie Taylor. A storied amateur and professional career that is now coming to an end. And just as Katie Taylor is set to make her exit, retire from the sport of boxing, Vasyl Lomachenko has unretired.
So Keyshawn Davis is calling him out.
Loma, fight me for your first fight back. Come on, let's do it, Loma. Fight me, Lomachenko. I come to Ukraine.
That's a great fight.
I go to Ukraine. Bro. You know what I'm saying? He about your height too. You good.
Well, hey, take it easy now. Take it easy. Us short kings are dangerous too. How do you see a fight with Loma going down?
Nah, Loma, you are a legend. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna start by saying that. You a legend, Loma. How much time I got? But you gonna fight if you decide to fight me, I'm knocking you out just like Baranchi. Facts.
So here we have yet another young fighter who's supposed to be all in their prime, looking to capitalize off the ravages of time. And what is an aging fighter who has unretired, shouldn't Keyshawn Davis focus on winning a belt from someone at the weight where he is now? Because I don't think Lomachenko is coming back as a 140-pound fighter. In all likelihood, when he comes back, he'll come back at lightweight.
It feels like there's even less reason for Loma to fight Keyshawn than there is for Katie to fight Alicia, because at least Alicia has established herself as the best super featherweight in the division, whereas Keyshawn, he didn't establish he's the best at 135, and he's barely scratched the surface at 140.
I guess what really irritated me about the call-out is this guy hasn't been a professional boxer all that long. He doesn't actually have that many fights, under 20, and he's already looking for shortcuts. Already looking for shortcuts to the money before he's established anything semblant of a legacy. You should be focusing on winning titles and unifying them. You should be focusing on undisputed. God forbid that you compare this younger generation of fighters to their predecessors, because then they're just going to get offended that today's young boxer is not up to scratch and not doing for the sport what their predecessors did. Then they're just going to get mad at you, but it's the truth.
All you got today are a bunch of young, lazy jackasses, a bunch of schmucks that are looking for shortcuts to the money. You're not on Loma's radar. Why would you be?
What the fuck have you done so far that you should?
He may have only said it in passing, and said it in jest, but maybe that's the problem. There's too much time jesting and joking and
Fucking around.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I don't expect that Lomachenko will either. Don't expect to see Keyshawn Davis versus Lomachenko.
For calling out quasi-retired fighters in their late 30s, why don't you call out Gary Antoine Russell, your division's WBA champion? Why don't you target the IBF title and whoever wins that?
Dalton Smith target his WBC. We've spent enough time hearing about your love affair with Shakur Stevenson and how you would never fight each other because you're friends.
Then he ought to drop that brown belt if he's not going to unify it with the others and let somebody else fight for it. Let Keyshawn fight for it. These kids, they just ain't good for nothing, and it's hard to like them.
I think that's what irritated me about the call-out. It's just another young American fighter looking for shortcuts to the money off of somebody else's name. That's all they're really good for these days.
Hey. Yeah, all right.
How are you, buddy?
Good, bro. I really respect you as an
All right,
athlete
so
and as a brand, and you are very
this is me
smart.
talking to Canelo.
I look up to you. You're inspiration. Me and you have a lot of similarities. Fast cars, fun, razors,
Good mind.
horses,
And what do you say?
all
Good
of
mind.
that. All of that. Thank you, man.
Things and I respect you. And I have nothing
How much money did he want?
on myself.
Canelo wanted 200 million.
Focus in yours.
We're still listening to the conversation here, right? Or did it just end?
Yeah, and you as well, brother. And,
Still listening?
I think, one day we make a good fight. Until then, we can be friends.
Killy.
Not right now. All right. So, Canelo, I have the $200 million for you. Easy money. Jake Paul versus Canelo. Let's get it done. This is what the fans have been waiting for. This is the biggest fight that can possibly be made in boxing.
So it would seem that Jake Paul is still interested in sharing the ring with Canelo Alvarez. There's been a big question as to whether or not Jake Paul will continue to box after having his jaw broken in 2 places by Anthony Joshua in the previous year. And would those injuries end Jake Paul's boxing career? It would seem that we have our answer. If he is now advocating for a Canelo Alvarez fight, it's gotta be because he means to keep fighting, he means to keep boxing, and he's back to calling out fighters that are noticeably smaller than he is, since he can't hope to close the skills gap. With many of these professional boxers, one way to balance the scale is to fight guys that are smaller than he is, like Gervonta Davis. If they would have fought, like Canelo Alvarez.
To sort of put them on an even keel, or try to, that Canelo Alvarez is many times more experienced than Jake Paul, but he's also noticeably smaller. Does it happen?
For that kind of money, $200 million, a lot of things can happen. I know that. Canelo Alvarez is said to have an existing deal with Turkey El Sheikh, what's supposed to be a 3-fight deal, I think. Can one of those fights be the Jake Paul fight?
Maybe. That's a lot of money.
Though you have to figure that if Jake Paul really has access to that kind of cash to make that fight a reality, it's gotta be because Netflix is involved. It's gotta be because Netflix would want it.
MVP would promote it, not Turkey, not Ring Magazine, not Zuffa.
MVP would be at the helm of the promotion. And on the undercard, you can expect to see many of MVP's fighters, which they still have to accommodate separately. There's been a question as to whether or not Jake Paul and Nakisa Badarian can really accommodate all of these women boxers that they've signed, because they've signed a great deal. Female fighters from all around the world, but there are only so many fight dates to go around. Recently inking a deal with ESPN.
We've already seen 2 MVP cards on the platform, and there is set to be another at the end of this month. But of course, ESPN is not making the same investment in MVP that they made years ago in Top Rank. They're not kicking out $80 or $90 million to MVP to do shows on their platform.
So how do you accommodate that many fighters without that kind of an investment? It would seem that Jake Paul has to keep fighting. The good news is, it looks like he's going to. He's been the anchor for their events, many of which their stable of fighters have benefited from. And I do not think that MVP is yet in a place where they can stay afloat off of just their stable alone. They need for Jake to keep fighting.
It looks like he's going to.
One day, their stable of fighters, male and female, may get to a point where they can stay afloat just with that and promoting that, but I do not yet think they're in a place where they can do that now.
He's got to keep fighting.
I don't actually know that Canelo Alvarez is going to take him up on his offer, but for $200 million to box a novice who's already gotten his jaw broke. This is one of those rare instances in the sport of boxing where the boxing gods offer you a low-risk, high-reward opponent, like what Ryan Garcia was for Gervonta Davis. Jake Paul is that and more for Canelo Alvarez. And for your run-of-the-mill $30 or $40 million, Canelo not being strapped for cash, he could turn his nose up at that, but $200 million?
That is a very hard number to ignore. The fight between them would have to be at some kind of a catch weight falling within the cruiserweight limit.
Jake Paul's a big boy. He can't afford to drop down to light heavyweight. That's not meeting in the middle. That's him killing himself. Not that Canelo needs him to put a hurting on him. I don't think Canelo would go easy on Jake Paul the way that Anthony Joshua did. And even in going easy on him, he still broke his jaw.
So we'll see what develops and what doesn't.
Told you guys this guy was done, bro. And look, I'm not happy to be right because he looked bad, bro. I said to myself, what is he going to do? Is he going to rematch this guy? Does he move on or does he retire? Like, where does David Morrell go now, losing to a domestic level UK fighter with 3 losses and 1 draw? Literally, Carl Frampton said on a telecast that win makes Zach Chelly world level now because he hadn't been on the world stage. Shout out to Chelly. Did nothing special other than be tough, gritty, and the will to win. It wasn't like we seen an overwhelming amount of skill on display. He isn't the next Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson.
It's a little hard to digest. The idea that Zach Chelly beating David Morrell now makes Zach Chelly a world-level fighter when there's very little evidence of David being a world-level fighter. He didn't face any world-level opponents as a super middleweight, and as soon as he started fighting more familiar faces and more formidable adversaries, he started to unravel. And this was before he gets beat by David Benavidez. I want to say that. Nestor Gibbs is of the opinion that what you're seeing now are the after effects of the David Benavidez fight when David Morrell looked bang average before that with Radovanje Kalajic.
So I wouldn't overstate the role of David Benavidez in what you're seeing now from David Morrell. Americans do love their media creations.
In many ways, David Morrell is a media creation. He developed a sort of fleeting reputation as a bogeyman at 168 because David Benavidez didn't want to fight him right away.
But he eventually fought him. It mirrors the situation with Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz. You will remember it was similar. Luis Ortiz wanted to fight Wilder, and Wilder didn't want to do it right away, so suddenly Luis Ortiz becomes a bogeyman. But eventually they fought, and Wilder won.
And then, like now, it involved a Cuban fighter.
Luis Ortiz is Cuban. David Morrell is Cuban, so maybe what it is Americans have a penchant for overrating these Cuban fighters on the premise of what they do as amateurs in the paid ranks. You'd be hard-pressed to find an abundance of accomplished Cuban fighters.
Some mention of David Morrell and a rematch with Zach Chelly. I haven't seen anything about David Morrell pursuing a rematch with Zach, and all I've seen of Zach is him wanting a fight with Callum Smith. I don't imagine that Zach and his team are in any hurry to give David Morrell an opportunity. They want to capitalize off this.
They want to fight Callum Smith, and I could definitely see that fight happening, and I can definitely see Callum Smith winning that fight, who's proven himself at world level more times than David Morrell, with none of the hype. You know, the Americans like to say that Callum is just another Euro bum that Canelo Alvarez beat.
But what we can say conclusively about that quote-unquote Euro bum is he's at least been a full world champion before and held the Ring Magazine title, something that David Morrell never sniffed, and that Callum Smith was pouncing on the Zach Chellys of the world en route to world level, whereas David seems to have fumbled
against the domestic level Brit. That's the comedy of it. Zach Chelly's the kind of guy that Callum Smith and other fighters like him beat on their way up. David Morrell couldn't make it past him, and I don't think it's because he was so irreparably damaged from the David Benavidez fight. It's not like David really beat him up or knocked him down or knocked him out. It wasn't that kind of fight.
I don't even remember David Morrell being cut in that fight or having any ghastly injuries like a hematoma or really bad swelling somewhere. I think a lot of the Americans are exaggerating about the extent of the damage from that fight because they're the ones who hyped him up.
To hype up David.
Up until the point that David Benavidez beats Zurdo Ramirez for those 2 alphabet titles, if you would have asked them, who is the best guy that David Benavidez fought and beat, they would have told you David Morrell.
Because he was unbeaten, because he was Cuban, but he was also unbeaten and unproven.
Part of the reason he's unraveling so soon in his boxing career is because he tried to take shortcuts. I talked about it in my previous video. Before you know it, this guy was targeting money fights at just being 4-0, 5-0 in the super middleweight division. He didn't give himself time to fully develop as a fighter. So, here we are.
His biggest mistake was following David Benavidez up to the light heavyweight division when he still needed to make his bones at super middle. But he chose to chase the money, and this is what he got.
I don't know what happens to him now, but he just seems like another overhyped fighter, overhyped by the Americans who always play up the same tropes.
Same shit, different fighter.